Hello and welcome to the PublishU podcast, where we explore the real life stories of authors from around the world. Today, we're talking to Phil Barber from Stoke-on-Trent, who has written a book called Turning the Tide. Hey, Phil, great to see you today.
Thank you, Matt. Good to see you too.
So excited that your book is now published and globally available. This is really, really exciting. But before we jump into your book, I'd love just to know a little bit more about you. You actually wrote this book, I think, with your brother. Is that right?
Yeah, brother Brian. That's right. Yeah.
So introduce Brian to us and then introduce yourself to us. Just briefly, just so we know a little bit more about you.
Okay, so Brian, he's been working in youth work for many years. And I was his helper years ago.
Yeah.
And then we kind of switched roles when I became the pastor and then the senior pastor of the church that we planted. And he's been my helper in recent years. Go. Yeah, so we've kind of worked in partnership together.
Good brothers.
Yeah.
I mean, have you done this paid all your life, or do you guys have proper jobs, as it were? What's day job?
Are you implying that a pastor's not a proper job? No. So Brian was a school teacher, deputy principal of the sixth form college in Stoke.
Yeah.
And I was a school teacher for a while. Yeah. A high school teacher, but then the Lord called me to plant a church in '92, which we did, and then that grew, and I became a full-time senior pastor eventually.
Fantastic. Yeah. So you've both been teachers. You've both been involved in community leadership. Phil, what first made you think I might like to write a book? Because, you know, not everybody has that thought, do they? But you did. When did you first have it?
Well, I think Brian and I have both written books before, Matt, to be honest. But what inspired us to write this really was a very deep concern for the church in this country. Although there are churches about that are growing and strong, if you look around, there are churches everywhere that have been turned into carpet warehouses and private houses. And that really, you know, tapping my heart here, it really grieves me and Brian to see churches closing, to see communities where young people are growing up not hearing the good news of Jesus. And I think we were inspired by the Holy Spirit to try and do something, to make a little contribution, to see if we could turn the tide of that closure of churches all around the country.
Yeah, hence the title of your book, Turning the Tide. Yeah, I've seen carpet warehouses, private houses. I mean, lovely private houses in the country.
They do.
Some lovely bars, cocktail bars, nightclubs, you know, but you're passionate about seeing church buildings used as church buildings.
Well, yeah, I mean, the building is just a facility, isn't it? It's the people really that count. But where you see a congregation shrink and become elderly, and then eventually they run out of energy to keep the witness going, and then they close, that is just a national tragedy. It is. And I don't think, Brian and I don't think, that any church need to close if they make the right moves.
Yeah.
And that's what our book is about, really. The book is full of advice. Yeah, it's full of advice from our experience of how to grow the kingdom. And it's not really rocket science, you know?
No. So what are the right moves you recommend in your book, Turning the Tide?
Oh, gosh. There's so many, really, Matt.
What if there were top three most important moves as you describe them? What would they be, Phil?
Gosh, you put me on the spot now, Matt, really. I think
I am, yeah, totally.
I know you are. I know what you're doing. Yeah. Well, I would say that the gospel is unchanging. It's the power of God unto salvation. And where the gospel is proclaimed, lives will change. The issue is that in many cases now, the gospel is proclaimed in a different cultural language to the language that people are speaking. And our country has become multicultural, and there are many people now who don't really connect with traditional church at all.
I mean, lots of people listening, Phil, and not necessarily people of faith, and they're gospel. What are you talking about? What's the gospel?
So the gospel is the good news of Jesus, that God sent Jesus to earth, and he showed us what God is like through his loving life. And he died on a cross to reconcile us back to God. And his spirit lives within us when we invite him into our lives. And that simple gospel, which it needs a lot more explanation, can be proclaimed in language that people can connect with and relate to. And that's to do with music and the words that are used and the style of the way things are presented. For example, we now live, as we are doing now, in a visual age, and people are connecting, on the internet visually, on the TV and so on. But a lot of traditional church, is audio only. Yeah. And it's very hard for people who are used to sound bites and visual, quick news items and so on, to actually sit through a long sermon with nothing to look at.
Yeah. I'm dyslexic, and people with dyslexia, we think visually rather than in words.
Correct. Yeah.
So actually being told, whether it's at school or church or anywhere else, to sit and listen for a long period of time, there's a point at which you just reach saturation, and it's quite early on for me.
Correct, yeah.
And I just can't take in any more, because I need to think visually. And actually, it has huge advantages thinking visually. The company behind Post-it notes say that when you think visually, you think 60,000 times faster than when you think with words.
Yeah.
So it can be very powerful. So your book also encourages people of faith, churches, to communicate visually. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's one of the key strategies, I think, for churches. I think if churches can grasp hold of that, and it's not expensive to do that, it's simple, and it can involve members of the congregation in setting up visual things, that can help new people coming in to connect and to look at things on the screen and or on a prayer wall, or there are various ways to present visually the gospel. And as you say, that can be very helpful to people to think through the message of Jesus and to go on that journey of faith, I think.
Yeah, amazing. So, Phil, your book, Turning the Tide, you talked about, churches communicating clearly the gospel, as you describe it. You talked about churches using more visual medium to communicate, not just words. Is there one other little nugget you'd take from your book that would help move the church to be more effective, you think?
Yeah, I think I would highlight teamwork as another nugget. I think that a lot of leaders who are very sincere in their leadership tend to try and do everything. And that can be where they're trained, really, to be in charge of everything. And I would say that, well, the way that I built church was with a team. And teamwork means giving people their head, letting people get on with the job according to their own talents and skills, because no leader is omnicompetent, and we need lots of different skills. And I think that teamwork approach, it involves people, it helps people not to feel frustrated, particularly professional people. I think if you're a professional person and you're used to working in a team, in an office or a company, and you come to church and you're told to sit there and be quiet and then go home, that's very off-putting, really. And you want to say, well, how can I get involved? What can I do? How can I use my skills? So there's a lot in the book about building teams and working together and being the leader of a team, rather than trying to take everything on as a leader yourself. And I think that's a very important nugget, as you say.
Yeah, fantastic. So, Phil, as we come to the close of this interview, what is your highest hope for your book, Turning the Tide? What do you hope is the impact of the book?
Well, I really, and both of us, Brian and I, both sincerely hope that some leaders and churches will get hold of the book, read it. It's full of discussion questions. You know, it's not prescriptive. It paints scenarios, and they can read the scenarios, find in there anything that's helpful to them, discuss and make changes, and hopefully see their church begin to grow. And if we can save some churches from closing and see churches growing and new disciples coming to faith in Jesus, that would be my heart. That would be my hope.
Oh, hey, well, thank you, Phil. And thank you all for listening to the PublishU podcast featuring the real life stories of authors from around the world. If you're interested in becoming an author like Phil and Brian, please visit www.PublishU.com. And if you enjoyed this broadcast, make sure you subscribe for more. Thank you so much for joining us, and goodbye for now.
Goodbye.